The September morning was crisp and clear as I folded my last uniform and placed it carefully in my duffel bag. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves, United States Army, deploying to Iraq in less than 6 hours. I had been through this ritual twice before, but this time felt different. This time, I was leaving behind more than memories. I was leaving behind my first home. I walked through the modest three-bedroom ranch house one more time, running my fingers along the kitchen counters I had installed myself. The living room walls still smelled faintly of the sage green paint I had applied just 2 months earlier. This house on Oak Ridge Lane represented everything I had worked for since enlisting at 18. Purchased with my VA loan, it was my piece of the American dream, my promise to myself that military life would not mean always being transient. Through the window, I could see the perfectly manicured lawns of Pinewood Estates, each one conforming to the strict standards of our homeowners association. Their rules had seemed tedious when I first moved in: specific garbage can placement, approved mailbox designs, restrictions on holiday decorations. But now, those small annoyances seemed like quaint aspects of civilian life I would soon miss in the dust and danger of Iraq. I had spent weeks preparing for my absence. All my bills were set on auto pay through my Navy Federal account. My brother James had a spare key and would check on the place monthly. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, promised to collect any packages or notices. Everything was arranged, organized, accounted for. I was good at planning. It was part of my job. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. Mr. Richards, the HOA board president, stood on my porch with a small American flag pin on his navy blazer lapel. "Just wanted to wish you well, Sergeant," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service. Pinewood Estates is proud to have you as a resident." "I appreciate that, sir," I replied, inviting him in for a moment. "I have set up automatic payments for the HOA dues. Everything should continue smoothly while I am gone." Richards nodded, glancing around my living room with approving eyes. "Not to worry, we take care of our own here. Just focus on coming home safe. How long will you be deployed?" 12 months minimum, possibly 15, I answered, handing him my contact information sheet. "All my details are here. Email is best, but sometimes the connection is spotty over there." "We understand completely," Richard said, pocketing the paper without looking at it. "Your country appreciates your sacrifice, son, and so does Pinewood Estates." As Mr. Richards left, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. At least the HOA understood my situation. One less thing to worry about. The moving truck arrived at 2:30 to take my most valuable possessions to my parents' place for safekeeping. By 4, I stood on the empty driveway, house keys in hand, duffel bag at my feet. The afternoon sun caught the brass knocker on my front door, sending a gleam across the porch. I took a mental snapshot of that moment. My red front door, the young maple tree I had planted last spring, the American flag hanging beside the entrance. I locked the door one final time, testing the handle from habit. The solid click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded definitive, conclusive. I did not know then that I was locking myself out of my own future, that this simple, everyday action would be the last time I crossed that threshold as the rightful owner. I drove away with one last glance in the rearview mirror, completely unaware that I had just begun the longest journey of my life, one that would test my resolve far beyond anything I would face in combat. The Iraqi sun was relentless, beating down on our forward operating base with punishing intensity. 3 months into my deployment, and the days had begun to blur together in a haze of patrols, intelligence briefings, and the constant vigilance required to stay alive. Camp Victory was anything but victorious most days, a collection of dust-covered buildings, concrete barriers, and the ever-present sound of helicopters coming and going. Communication with home was a luxury, not a given. The internet cafe on base offered sporadic connectivity at best, with lines of soldiers waiting for their 15-minute window to connect with the world they had left behind. When my turn came one Tuesday afternoon, I logged into my bank account, scanning the recent transactions with the efficiency of someone who knew their time was limited. That was when I first noticed it. A returned payment to Pinewood Estates HOA marked insufficient funds. I stared at the screen, confusion turning to alarm. My account had plenty of money. I scrolled through the details, finding the problem buried in the transaction information. The bank had recently updated their routing numbers, and my automatic payment had been rejected due to an outdated routing number. 2 minutes, Reeves, called the specialist managing the time slots. I quickly logged into my email, typing a frantic message to the HOA office explaining the situation. I included my new routing number, authorization to withdraw the payment plus any reasonable fee, and an apology for the oversight. I hit send just as my time expired, hoping it would be enough. 3 weeks passed before I could check again. This time, I found 2 more rejected payments and a growing sense of dread. My follow-up email to the HOA bounced back, address not recognized. I tried calling the number listed on their website during my next communication window, but the international connection was terrible, cutting out every few seconds, making any real conversation impossible. "You having problems back home, Reeves?" Lieutenant Garcia asked, noticing my frustration as I slammed down the satellite phone. "Just some banking issues, sir. Nothing major." I did not want to burden anyone with my problems when we were all facing the same challenges of deployment. But as weeks turned into months, the knot in my stomach grew. During mail call in early February, I received a bundle of letters from home. Buried among birthday cards and a care package from my parents was an official-looking envelope with the Pinewood Estates logo embossed on the corner. I opened it that night in my bunk, the beam of my flashlight illuminating words that made my blood run cold. The letter detailed my delinquency in HOA payments, adding late fees, administrative charges, and covenant violation penalties that had transformed my $220 monthly dues into a debt of over $800. The letter concluded with a warning about further actions if the amount was not paid in full within 30 days, a deadline that had passed 3 weeks before the letter even reached me. That night, I drafted a letter by hand on official Army stationery, explaining my situation in detail. I included copies of my deployment orders, contact information for my commanding officer, and a money order for the full $800, despite feeling the injustice of those added fees. I sent the package the next morning, priority mail with tracking. 2 weeks later, during a particularly intense period of operations, we lost communication with the base for nearly 10 days. When we finally returned, I had a brief window to check my personal matters before our next mission. The tracking showed my package had been delivered, but there was no acknowledgement from the HOA. I sent another email. Nothing. "You look worried, Staff Sergeant," said Private Williams as we prepared our gear for patrol. "Everything okay back home?" I nodded, not wanting to distract anyone before we headed out into hostile territory. "Just some paperwork issues. Nothing I cannot handle once we get back to base." Little did I know that back in Pinewood Estates, while I was preparing to risk my life on another patrol, a machine of bureaucracy and greed was already in motion, one that would prove more devastating to me than any enemy we faced in the desert. As I checked my weapon and secured my helmet, across the world, My home was already being marked for seizure. "Hey, Reeves, you been getting certified mail notices?" The question came from Sergeant Martinez as we shared a rare, quiet moment between missions. We were sitting in the shade of a transport vehicle, cleaning our weapons after 3 days in the field. I looked up, squinting against the glare bouncing off the sand. "What do you mean?" Martinez wiped his brow, leaving a streak of dust across his forehead. "My wife says there have been certified letters coming to our house. She had to sign for them. Something about our mortgage. Made me think, you living alone, who would be signing for your mail?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Certified mail required signatures. With no one living at my house, any important notices would just pile up, unacknowledged. That night, I used my weekly call allocation to phone my brother instead of my parents. The connection was terrible, the 18-hour time difference meaning I woke him from a dead sleep at 3 a.m. his time. "James," I said, speaking loudly over the static, "I need you to check on my house, today if possible." "Mike, that you okay?" His voice was thick with sleep and concern. "I am fine, but I need you to check if there are notices at my house. Certified mail, anything from the HOA." The line crackled and hissed. James promised to go first thing in the morning. The next 24 hours stretched endlessly as I tried to focus on my duties, while a growing sense of foreboding gnawed at my concentration. When the call finally came, I was in the communications tent, having pulled strings with the comms officer to ensure I would not miss it. James's voice came through in broken fragments. "Mike, went to your house. Yellow notices everywhere." "What kind of notices?" I pressed, straining to hear through the interference. "Foreclosure, HOA lien. But Mike, that is not the worst part." His voice dropped and I had to press the phone painfully against my ear to hear him. "My key would not work. They changed the locks, bro. I cannot get in." The tent seemed to tilt around me. "Changed the locks? On my house? While I was deployed in a combat zone?" "There is a notice saying the property is now owned by the HOA," James continued, his voice clearer now as the connection temporarily improved. "Something about a foreclosure sale. Mike, what the hell is going on?" I could not answer him. My mind was racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. How could missing a few HOA payments lead to foreclosure? How could they sell my house without notifying me properly? I was serving my country, for God's sake. "Get pictures," I managed finally. "Document everything. And James, find out who I need to talk to. Get me names, numbers, anything." The next day, I requested an emergency meeting with Captain Reynolds, our JAG officer. He listened grimly as I laid out what little I knew, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Unfortunately, Sergeant Reeves, this is not the first case like this I have seen," he said when I finished. "HOAs in some states have extraordinary powers. They can place liens and foreclose more quickly than even mortgage companies in some cases." "But I am on active duty," I protested. "Does not the Service Members' Civil Relief Act protect me from exactly this kind of thing?" Reynolds nodded slowly. "It should, but there are loopholes and some HOAs have become experts at exploiting them. They might claim they sent notices you never received, or that they were unaware of your military status despite your informing them." He looked up from his notes, his expression serious. "I will be honest with you, Reeves. Fighting this from here will be difficult. I can help draft some official letters, but until you return stateside, your options are limited." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Limited options. While I was risking my life daily, my own country's laws were offering me limited protection for my most valuable possession. That evening, I received an email from James with attached photos. Yellow foreclosure notices plastered across my red front door. A new lockbox hanging where my keypad had been. And most devastating of all, a sign in the yard reading "Property of Pinewood Estates HOA, no trespassing." I printed one of the photos and pinned it inside my locker. Every morning when I geared up for patrol, I looked at that image of my violated home. It became a talisman of sorts, a reminder that I was fighting battles on two fronts now. As weeks passed, more details emerged through James's investigations. The HOA had filed a lien after just 2 missed payments. They had moved to foreclosure after 3. The certified letters, the ones I had never received or signed for, were their only attempt at notification. No one had called my emergency contacts. No one had acknowledged my military status. The most sickening revelation came 6 weeks later. The HOA had sold my house at a county auction to satisfy the lien, not the mortgage, which I had never missed a payment on, but the HOA dues and accumulated fees totaling just over $800. My home, my sanctuary, my piece of America worth nearly $300,000, had been sold out from under me while I defended that very same country thousands of miles away. The email arrived during the darkest hour of night. I had just returned from a 36-hour mission, my uniform still caked with dust and sweat, when I decided to check my messages before collapsing into my bunk. The subject line stopped me cold. Auction results, property ID 4291, Oak Ridge Lane. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. James had managed to get information from the county records office, forwarding me the official documentation of my home's sale. I read the document once, twice, 3 times, my exhausted mind refusing to process the words before me. Sale price, $42,000. Buyer, Evergreen Property Holdings, LLC. $42,000. For a home appraised at $297,000 just last year. Sold to cover an $800 debt that had ballooned with fees and legal costs to just under $4,000. The remaining proceeds, according to the document, would be held in escrow for 90 days, then released to me as the former homeowner. As I stared at the screen, images of my house flashed through my mind. The kitchen where I had spent weekends installing granite countertops. The back patio where I had planned to build a deck when I returned. The living room with the built-in bookshelves I had crafted by hand. The American flag I had mounted by the front door with such pride. All of it gone, sold for pennies on the dollar while I was deployed. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I drafted emails to the HOA board, to the county recorder's office, to a list of attorneys James had gathered for me. Most bounced back or received automated responses. A few promised to look into the matter. None offered immediate help. 3 days later, I managed to arrange a video call with Douglas Richards, the Pinewood Estates HOA president. The same man who had stood on my porch months earlier, thanking me for my service, promising to take care of our own. His face on the screen was impassive as I explained my situation, my voice growing increasingly desperate as he remained unmoved. "Mr. Richards, I informed the HOA of my deployment. I sent a money order for the full amount plus penalties. I tried repeatedly to contact your office." Richards adjusted his tie, his expression never changing. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, while we appreciate your service, the rules of our community apply equally to everyone. We sent multiple notices. We followed all legal procedures." "I was in a combat zone," I said, struggling to keep my composure. "I never received those notices. You knew I was deployed. I gave you my contact information personally." "Rules are rules," he replied, the phrase landing like a physical blow. "Everyone gets the same treatment here. We cannot make exceptions based on personal circumstances." The call ended shortly after, with Richards promising to review the file, but offering no real hope. The bitter irony was not lost on me, fighting for American freedoms abroad while those same freedoms were denied at home. That night I sat with a group of fellow soldiers in the barracks, the weight of my situation finally spilling over. To my surprise, my story was met not just with sympathy, but with recognition. "My cousin lost his house the same way during his second tour," said Specialist Rodriguez. "HOA foreclosed over some fence violation while he was in Afghanistan, came home to nothing." Sergeant Miller nodded grimly. "Friend of mine in the Marines had his car repossessed while he was deployed. Had all the paperwork filed for military deferment, but they took it anyway. Took him 2 years of fighting to get compensation." One by one, they shared stories of homes lost, vehicles seized, possessions sold, all while they served their country. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Those of us risking our lives overseas were uniquely vulnerable to predatory practices at home. "You need to document everything," advised Lieutenant Wilson, who had been quietly listening. "Every email, every call, every piece of paper. When you get home, you are going to need a specialized attorney. The SCRA has teeth, but you need someone who knows how to use them." For the first time since learning of the foreclosure, I felt something other than despair. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface crystallized into resolve. These men and women around me, they understood. More than that, they cared. In their eyes, I saw not pity but solidarity, the silent promise that my fight would become their fight too. I pinned a map of Pinewood Estates above my bunk that night, marking my house with a red X each morning when I woke and each night before sleep. I looked at that map, reminding myself that there would be justice. Not just for me, but for every service member who had been treated this way. Halfway across the world from my stolen home, surrounded by the dangers of war, I made myself a promise. This battle was not over. It was just beginning. The plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with a jolt that shook me from my thoughts. After 15 months in Iraq, American soil felt surreal beneath my feet as I walked through the terminal, still in uniform duffel bags slung over my shoulder. Other passengers nodded respectfully as I passed. An elderly man stood and saluted. A woman whispered, "Thank you for your service," as our paths crossed. If they only knew. I had left as a homeowner, a man with roots and a future. I returned homeless, betrayed by the very community I had been fighting to protect. Outside the airport, I hailed a taxi, the driver glancing at me in the rearview mirror as I gave him the address. My address, on Oak Ridge Lane. "Coming home from deployment?" he asked conversationally. "Something like that," I replied, watching the familiar Atlanta suburbs pass by the window. Pinewood Estates looked exactly as I remembered it. The same manicured lawns, the same tasteful landscaping, the same HOA-approved mailboxes standing like sentinels at the end of each driveway. Yet everything had changed. The taxi pulled up in front of my house. No, not my house anymore, and I felt a physical ache in my chest at the sight of it. New curtains hung in the windows. A different car sat in the driveway. The young maple tree I had planted had grown nearly a foot. "Want me to wait?" the driver asked, nodding my hesitation. "Yes, please." Walking up the driveway felt like traversing an alien landscape. The red front door had been repainted a conservative beige, the brass knocker replaced with something more modern. The flag mount beside the door stood empty. I was about to knock when the door opened, revealing a woman in her 30s, a toddler balanced on her hip. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in my uniform. "Can I help you?" she asked. This was my house," I said, the words catching in my throat, "before my deployment." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by discomfort. Oh, I see. We purchased this house at auction last year. We had no idea." "It is not your fault," I interrupted, not wanting to make her feel guilty for something beyond her control. "I just wanted to see it one more time." Her husband appeared behind her, equally uncomfortable but polite. "Would you like to come in? We did not change much." But I could not bear it, could not walk through those rooms knowing they no longer belonged to me, could not see what had become of the space I had poured my heart into. "No, thank you. I appreciate the offer, but I should go." As I turned to leave, the man called after me. "We really had no idea. The paperwork was all in order. We thought someone just could not afford the mortgage anymore." I nodded without turning back. "I understand. Take good care of it." The taxi driver said nothing as I climbed back into the car, just watched me with sympathetic eyes in the rearview mirror. "Veterans Affairs Office, please," I said quietly. "Downtown branch." The VA office was housed in a brutalist concrete building that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Inside, however, I found an unexpected ally. Marion Doyle, Veterans Benefits Coordinator, listened to my story with growing indignation, filling page after page with notes. "This happens far too often," she said when I finished, her pen tapping against the desk with barely contained anger. "HOAs, banks, landlords, taking advantage while service members are deployed. It is a disgrace." She pulled a thick binder from the shelf behind her, flipping purposefully through its pages. "The Service Members Civil Relief Act provides certain protections. And what they did, changing locks and proceeding with foreclosure while you were on active duty, that raises serious questions about their compliance with federal law." For the first time since receiving that fateful email in Iraq, I felt a flicker of hope. "Can I get my house back?" Marion's expression softened. "That might be complicated. The new owners are innocent purchasers from what you have told me, but compensation, damages, absolutely possible." She handed me a business card with a name circled in red ink. "Sarah Donovan, former JAG officer, now specializes in SCRA cases. Tell her I sent you. She loves taking on cases like yours." As I left the VA office, the Georgia sun beat down on my shoulders, not unlike the Iraqi sun I had endured for 15 months. But something had changed. The weight of hopelessness had lifted slightly, replaced by something I recognized from my military training, the steady resolve that comes with having a mission, an objective, a plan of attack. I found a modest hotel room that night, spreading my few possessions across the generic comforter. My service medals, my dog tags, the folded flag I had carried home, and the stack of documents that told the story of my stolen home. Sitting at the small desk, I began organizing everything chronologically: emails, bank statements, deployment orders, the few responses I had received from the HOA. Each piece of paper represented another link in the chain of injustice. Together, they told a story that demanded to be heard. I called my brother James, letting him know I had made it home safely. "What now?" he asked. "You staying with Mom and Dad until you figure things out?" "No," I said, a new certainty in my voice. "I am staying right here in Atlanta. I have a new mission now." "What mission is that?" I looked down at the business card in my hand, at the name circled in red. Justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who has gone through this. They picked the wrong soldier to mess with James, and they are about to find that out. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I had not experienced since learning about the foreclosure: purpose. Clear, focused purpose. I had spent 15 months fighting for my country. Now it was time to fight for myself, and for everyone who had ever worn the uniform only to come home to betrayal. The offices of Donovan Legal Services occupied the fourth floor of a restored brick building in downtown Atlanta. The waiting room featured framed military commendations alongside law degrees and bar certifications, a visual testament to Sarah Donovan's dual identities as attorney and veteran. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," she said, extending her hand as she welcomed me into her office. "Marion called ahead, said you have quite the case." Donovan was a compact woman in her 50s with short silver hair and the ramrod straight posture that comes from decades of military service. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. "Please call me Michael," I said, taking the offered seat across from her desk. For the next hour, I laid out my story piece by piece, providing documentation for each claim. Donovan listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or examining particular documents more closely. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, eyes narrowed in thought. "This is not just wrong," she said finally, reaching for a pad of bright red post-it flags. "It is potentially illegal on multiple counts." She began marking specific pages in my documentation, creating a visual timeline of the HOA's actions. Failure to provide adequate notice, proceeding with collection actions against an active duty service member, failure to file proper affidavits regarding your military status before foreclosure. Each one is a separate violation of the SCRA. My heart quickened as she continued her assessment, hope building with each red flag she placed. "And this auction price," she said, tapping the county record. "42,000 for a property valued at nearly 300,000. That raises serious red flags about the foreclosure process itself." "Can I get my house back?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for months. Donovan's expression was carefully measured. "The innocent purchaser protection makes that unlikely, but financial compensation, punitive damages, those are very much on the table." She stood and moved to a large whiteboard on the wall, uncapping a marker. "Let me show you what we are dealing with." For the next 20 minutes, she outlined our legal strategy, drawing connections between statutes and my specific situation. As she spoke, her initial professional reserve fell away, replaced by a passionate intensity. "There is something else you should know," she said, returning to her desk and opening a drawer. "Yours is not an isolated case." She pulled out a folder containing newspaper clippings and printed articles. 4 other service members from Pinewood Estates and surrounding HOA communities have lost homes under similar circumstances in the past 3 years. 2 during deployments to Afghanistan, 1 during training at Fort Benning, another during emergency family leave. I felt my jaw tighten. "You think this is deliberate, targeting service members?" "I cannot prove intent yet," she said carefully, "but the pattern is suspicious, especially this." She slid a document across the desk, corporate registration papers for Evergreen Property Holdings LLC, the company that had purchased my home. "Notice the registered agent, Jeffrey Palmer, Mr. Richards' brother-in-law." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This was not just bureaucratic indifference. This was calculated predation. "So what now?" I asked. Now, Donovan said, her expression hardening with resolve, we build our case, document everything, create a timeline, identify witnesses, and prepare to file the most comprehensive SCRA violation lawsuit this county has ever seen. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a fixture at Donovan's office, working alongside her paralegal to construct our case. We obtained copies of every document filed in the foreclosure proceedings. We tracked down former HOA board members willing to speak about internal policies. We connected with the other veterans who had lost their homes, finding disturbing similarities in their experiences. Each day brought new discoveries, new evidence of systematic exploitation. What had begun as my personal tragedy was expanding into something larger, a pattern of predatory practices targeting those who could least defend themselves while serving their country. One afternoon, as we reviewed deposition strategies, Donovan's receptionist interrupted with news that would change everything. "Channel 5 is here," she announced. "The reporter says she got a tip about service members losing homes while deployed." Donovan looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded without hesitation. "Send them in." The reporter, Kate Martinez, listened intently as I shared my story, her cameraman capturing every word. When I finished, she leaned forward, recorder still running. "Would you be willing to go public with this? Your story could help other veterans facing similar situations." I thought of the other service members who had lost their homes, of those who might still be overseas, unaware that their own homes were at risk. The decision was easy. Absolutely, this story needs to be told. As the camera lights dimmed and the interview concluded, I felt a shift in the power dynamic of my situation. What had begun as a private humiliation was transforming into a public reckoning. My personal loss was evolving into a mission as important as any I had undertaken overseas. Outside the office windows, more news vans had appeared, alerted by the initial broadcast teasers. The story was spreading, gaining momentum, and with each retelling, the pressure on Pinewood Estates HOA would grow. The courtroom fell silent as the bailiff called my case. Reeves versus Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association and Evergreen Property Holdings LLC, case number CV202-43872. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment. 6 months of depositions, evidence gathering, and legal maneuvering. The story had grown beyond local news, picked up by national outlets as an example of the vulnerabilities faced by deployed service members. Other veterans had come forward with similar experiences, creating a groundswell of public outrage. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a slight woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, studied the documents before her as the attorneys made their final preparations. Sarah Donovan stood beside me at the plaintiff's table, calm and focused. Across the aisle, the HOA board members sat stiffly beside their legal team, avoiding eye contact. "Are the parties ready to proceed?" Judge Harmon asked, looking up over her reading glasses. "Ready, Your Honor," Donovan replied. The HOA attorney, a nervous man in an expensive suit, echoed the response. What followed was 3 days of testimony that laid bare the systematic exploitation practiced by Pinewood Estates. Former HOA employees testified about directives to pursue aggressive collection actions. Financial records revealed the pattern of quick foreclosures followed by below-market sales to connected entities. Most damning of all was the email exchange between Richards and his brother-in-law, discussing my property as another acquisition opportunity, just days after my first missed payment. On the final day of testimony, Donovan saved her most powerful evidence for last. On the courtroom's display screen appeared a photograph, me in full combat gear in Iraq, dated the same day the HOA had changed the locks on my home. The juxtaposition was stark and undeniable. While I had been risking my life for my country, the HOA had been stealing my home. Judge Harmon's verdict, when it came, was unequivocal. This court finds that the defendants violated multiple provisions of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, with willful disregard for federal protections afforded to active-duty military personnel. She awarded me the full market value of my former home, plus punitive damages equal to 3 times that amount. The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the bailiff's call for order. Outside the courthouse steps, surrounded by supporters, fellow veterans, and news cameras, I found myself at a loss for words when a reporter asked how I felt about the verdict. "This was never just about me," I said finally. "This was about making sure what happened to me never happens to another service member. Today, we sent a message that those who serve their country deserve better than to have their homes stolen while they are deployed." 6 months later, I stood in the driveway of my new house, a beautiful craftsman-style home on 5 acres outside the city limits. No HOA, no covenants, no rules except those I chose to live by. The settlement had allowed me to purchase it outright, with money left over to establish a legal aid fund for veterans facing housing issues during deployment. Most satisfying of all was the news that had come just last week. 3 other states had passed Michael's Law, strengthening SCRA protections for deployed service members facing HOA actions. My personal loss had created a legacy that would protect countless others. As I raised the American flag beside my new front door, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since returning from Iraq. This battle, fought not with weapons but with evidence, testimony, and the law, had ended in victory as meaningful as any military campaign. The